Hi, I'm Rick Bia. Oh, wait. No, I'm not. I'm sorry. My name is JR. What the? How did that happen? Yeah, my name is JR. Many of you have seen my other videos and probably thought I was a robot or completely just artificial intelligence. But I'm not. Trust me, AI is not quite there yet. Despite the hype it gets right now, I don't think I'm just AI anyway. But I can't really say for sure. I don't know why else I would invest in a decent microphone and try to learn how to improve the sound of my voice recordings if I were one. So, I hope everything on this video sounds decent. But anyway, that's beside the point. I'm here today with a little video about rock and roll music because I recently made a video about why 1971 is regarded as one of, if not the best years in rock music history. And while I still consider this to be mostly true, I wanted to also explore some other decades that were important to rock music. So, to continue with this topic, I decided to skip ahead 2 decades to 1991. 1991 is undoubtedly important for music in many ways, and this is a particularly significant year for me because it was the first time I really fell in love with and became quite involved with rock music as a kid. The amount of good music that was released in 1991 is nearly as incredible as that released in 1971. And I'm going to do my best to run through what I consider to be the top 10 albums of the year, plus a few more honorable mentions as well. And again, I'm mostly just covering mainstream rock music from the year, so other genres like rap and country and blues and even punk rock, which had less of an audience back then, are not the main focus of this video, so my apologies if any album you love is not listed here. This list is really mostly my personal opinion, mixed with some research I've done, and it was determined both by my personal take on the overall music and songs produced, but also how much of an impact and influence these albums had on rock music as a whole and the wider culture overall. So in some instances, I've put my own preferences aside just to acknowledge how important the album that came out that year was, even if it's not the absolute best that the band has ever made, or my absolute favorite from the group. Okay, so those are the ground rules for the list, and I hope you can respect my opinion as I will try to do for you, especially if you decide to make a video about your favorites. So first, there are a lot of honorable mentions to go over. Let's start the list off by going through some of those. I know I'm probably not including a ton of albums worthy of praise, so go ahead and leave a comment about any of the ones you think deserve to be here that I might have missed. Our first honorable mention of 1991 is U2's Achtung Baby. While I do think the song One is quite beautiful and one of my favorites from the later part of the group's career, I don't place Achtung Baby as high on the list, personally, because to me it marks the end of the 80s era of U2, which is, in my opinion, their best work. Still, this is a pretty good album, and has some great work on it. I'm sure there are a lot of U2 fans who would put this high on their list, but to me, Joshua Tree is the most significant work from Bono and the Boys. Next up, we have Talk Talk's Laughing Stock. You might know Talk Talk from their song It's My Life because you've heard their version of it, or even more likely because you've heard No Doubt's version of it. That song was originally recorded and released by Talk Talk in 1984, so it's not from this album. Laughing Stock is actually the final studio album from Talk Talk. And I'm including it here to give an example of just how ready the world was to leave behind the new wave, post-punk, and art rock groups of the 80s in favor of a new flavor of alternative rock that would make huge waves in the early 90s. More on that coming up. Next, we have the Pixies' Trompe le Monde. I hope I'm saying that right. The Pixies had a large impact on alternative rock, especially with songs like Where Is My Mind, which was released 3 years prior in 1988. Trompe le Monde was released on September 23, 1991, with its lead single Head On, a cover of the Jesus and Mary chain, that peaked at number 6 on the Billboard Modern Rock Tracks chart. But again, I'm including them more for their influence on other bands that we'll talk about more soon. Next up, we have Primus. Wikipedia classifies the band known as Primus as funk metal, and I suppose that's pretty accurate. They're kind of hard to define musically. The group released an album in 1991 called Sailing the Seas of Cheese. Primus is, without a doubt, one of the strangest bands to ever get so much critical praise, but they did, and they were all over MTV in the 90s, with some really weird music videos too. But if you liked them, you liked them, and I sure did back then. Not as much now, honestly, but it's hard to deny that they were musically pretty brilliant, albeit in a pretty unconventional way. Les Claypool, the band's lead singer and bassist virtuoso, is their main draw. The album's 3 singles were Jerry Was a Race Car Driver, Tommy the Cat, and Those Damned Blue Collar Tweakers. I saw Les Claypool play live with Sean Lennon not too long ago, and yes, I thought he was still pretty amazing with that guitar that has the fat strings on it. And lastly, with the honorable mentions, I'm going to include Fugazi's Steady Diet of Nothing. I have a lot of respect for Ian MacKaye musically. Minor Threat was such an important hardcore band that it would be stupid to forget about them. I never got into Fugazi quite as much though. Steady Diet of Nothing was released in 1991 and is generally accepted to be a good album and liked by their fans. And Fugazi is good from what I've heard. I've covered Waiting Room in one of my bands even. And they're not emo. Actually, MacKaye said that with Fugazi, he just wanted to make music with other people that were basically fun to make music with. And he was going more for a hardcore meets reggae thing. Okay, so those are the honorable mentions. We're off to a great start, 1991. You're already looking pretty good. Let's take a quick step back in time, though. It's 1981. In the overall evolution of mainstream rock, the 1980s were probably best known for creating the post-punk, new wave, alternative rock, and indie rock bands that would go on to completely blow up and rebuild rock music altogether from the ground up, and then ultimately create what we now call alternative rock, which was one of the few genres of the time that has never completely died. And then heavy metal came in many flavors in the 80s too, with thrash and hair metal being 2 of the most successful types around back then. By the time we got to the 90s, we start to see mainstream metal become generally more of a hard rock genre and not quite as dangerous sounding, I'd say, as hair metal fizzled out and some of the underground metal bands started to appear on MTV and the radio more and more. But I'm not talking about black metal or death metal, of course. That's a way different topic. So with that out of the way, we can now begin our official top 10 list. And first off, we'll take a look at one of those bands that crossed over from 80s college rock radio to become a very successful alternative rock band in the 90s. And that, of course, would be R.E.M. So at number 10, we have R.E.M's album Out of Time. Michael Stipe and the band released this highly successful album on March 8, 1991, with the lead single being Losing My Religion. This might have been the first time I had ever heard anyone play the mandolin, and boy did I love it. It's R.E.M's biggest hit song overall, and one that still holds up very well to this day. The album itself has sold more than 18 million copies worldwide, which is no small feat. R.E.M. would go on to release another phenomenal record in 1992 called Automatic for the People, which introduced me to the idea of depression, because the music video for Everybody Hurts just really caught me as a kid. Come on, everybody, let's all get out of our cars. At number 9, we have Ozzy Osbourne's No More Tears. Speaking of sad songs, Mama, I'm Coming Home, which was released as a single from No More Tears, can still make my eyes swell up just a little, even to this day. The song reached number 2 in the US, and the lyrics were written by none other than legendary Lemmy Kilmister of Motorhead. Zakk Wylde plays guitar and is a total shredder. His use of pinch harmonics in particular really gets me. We also get other great songs like the title track and I Don't Want to Change the World, which was also written with Lemmy. Lemmy actually contributed lyrics to 6 songs for the album, but only 4 of the songs made it to the final cut. I'm personally a fan of the direction Ozzy went in the 90s, unlike some of his contemporaries. He is one of the few artists who have always done great work, no matter the project or the decade. His 80s work is probably what he's best known for after Black Sabbath, but he was able to incorporate more of a hard rock and alternative rock version of metal in his 90s stuff, and I think it sounds great. This album is full of great music in that exact style and is definitely a contender for one of the best metal albums of the decade. At number 8, we have the Smashing Pumpkins' Gish. Gish is a great album. Sure, Siamese Dream is my favorite of theirs overall, and Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness is the band's most commercially successful album, but Gish is really good. And again, we have a band that started out in the 80s and was more in line with what you might call new wave music before ultimately becoming one of the most influential and successful alternative rock bands of the 90s. They're not exactly what I would consider grunge, but they were playing some music that was similar, with slower, groovier hard rock, around the same time as the other big guys of grunge, and so they get paired up with the likes of Stone Temple Pilots, Nirvana, Soundgarden, and Pearl Jam all the time because of this. And they were a personal favorite of mine back then, and I even wrote them a letter once through the mail, because back then they would actually mail you back a piece of paper with the lyrics to all the songs on Siamese Dream if you asked. What a different time. Man, if only I still had that. But Gish was their debut album, released in May of 1991, and it really wasn't a huge hit at first, but it ranks higher on my list because the Smashing Pumpkins were hands down one of the de facto best alternative rock bands of the 90s, and the album that started it all for them deserves some more recognition. It has since gained some more popularity, and is mostly well liked by fans of the group, and I'd highly recommend checking it out if you haven't already. At number 7, we have Temple of the Dog's self-titled album. I think I listened to this album every day for nearly 3 months straight back in 2020, and I don't even know why. I was just feeling it, like every day. Except maybe I do know why, because it's amazing. It's the only album this supergroup ever released, and all the songs are, well, extremely good. Temple of the Dog was a hybrid consisting of the guys who would later become the mythical grunge acts known as Pearl Jam and Soundgarden, two of the greatest bands to ever be classified in that short-lived genre. Chris Cornell sings lead vocals, and we all know how much we miss that guy as a lead singer. He was always insanely good. We're also treated to a very special guest appearance from none other than Eddie Vedder on Hunger Strike, which is easily the best song on the album, and probably one of the best rock songs of the 90s altogether, if I do say so myself. Say Hello to Heaven is a beautiful song too, with some unforgettable screams from Cornell. I love that Matt Cameron of Soundgarden plays the drums on the album. He has always been a favorite drummer of mine. So not only is it cool that this is basically Pearl Jam and Soundgarden smushed together to make one beautiful plate of grunge dinner, but it was written and recorded well before either band had really become very famous. Yet it still holds up as being just as good as any of the music that either band went on to make separately, in my opinion. Which brings us to number 6, Soundgarden's Bad Motorfinger. We just talked about Temple of the Dog, so this is a perfect segue to our 6th album on the list, Bad Motorfinger. This is the 3rd studio album from the band and was the predecessor to Super Unknown, which really put them on the map. Packed full of alternative tunings and even some unusual time signatures, the talent present on this album shines through on songs like Outshine, Jesus Christ Pose, and Rusty Cage, which was even covered by the late Johnny Cash, and to me, sounds somehow even more badass as an acoustic country song. So there you go. You owe it to yourself to take a listen to this one. I mean it. Number 5, Guns N' Roses' Use Your Illusion 1 and 2. As we reach the top 5, we're getting into the territory of some of the biggest, most massive, and most legendary bands to ever exist in the world of rock. Guns N' Roses is no exception. Appetite for Destruction is the album that every fan of theirs loves the most usually, but the Use Your Illusion albums, both released as one double album on September 17th, 1991, also feature some of the group's best songs. I'll have to admit that I prefer the McCartney original to GNR's cover of Live and Let Die, but it's still done very well. The songs that everyone knows and loves the most from these albums are Don't Cry, and of course the over-the-top ballad known as November Rain, which featured an extremely expensive but well-done music video. Yep. Especially when Slash rips through a few guitar solos in front of a little church in the middle of nowhere. The 90s were just perfect. Number 4, Pearl Jam 10. Okay, we're finally getting to Pearl Jam after speaking at length about both Temple of the Dog and Soundgarden, two groups that will forever be linked with the Seattle grunge champions. The reason this album, 10, is higher on the list than both of the other groups is simply because 10 has more hit songs than the other two albums combined. You know them, you love them, maybe you don't, maybe you do, but you know them, at least. This album brought us Once, Even Flow, Alive, Why Go, Black, and the ever-famous Jeremy. Those are the exact order they are presented on the album too. No wonder this album was so remarkably successful. Can't stop listening to it once it gets going. It was ranked number 1 on Rolling Stone magazine's Readers' Poll for the 10 greatest debut albums, and has been included as a high-ranking entry on many other best-of lists, coming in at number 209 on Rolling Stone magazine's The 500 Greatest Albums of All Time that they put out in 2012. It actually didn't take off right away though. It was released on August 27, 1991, but didn't really quite break through until the end of 1992 commercially. 10 would eventually spend 4 weeks as the number 2 album in the country. Billy Ray Cyrus prevented it from becoming number 1 though. The album was one of the 15 most successful albums of all time, as it spent 264 weeks on the Billboard charts. The album 10 had more success in the United States than Nirvana's breakthrough album had in the same period, and 2 years after its initial release, 10 was the 8th best-selling album in the United States, outselling their own Versus album. By the end of February 2013, 10 had sold 13 million copies in the US, earning it the RIAA certification for 13 Platinum. Both the song and the accompanying music video for Jeremy were met with strong opposition due to the sensitive subject matter, and the band even tried to bring down Ticketmaster after learning that the company was charging excessive fees to their customers. And that's pretty cool if you ask me. Alright, now at number 3 we have the Red Hot Chili Peppers' Blood Sugar Sex Magic. Love them or hate them, it seems like Red Hot Chili Peppers are here to stay. They've been around for like 40 years now? A lot of their fans agree, though, that when they have guitarist John Frusciante in the lineup, like they do right now, that's when they are at their best. And I am one of those people that agrees with that, and I rank their album Californication, which also features Frusciante, as my all-time favorite RHCP album. Blood Sugar Sex Magic was released on September 24th, 1991, and not only does it feature John Frusciante playing guitar, but you also get the lead singer, lyricist, and frontman extraordinaire Anthony Kiedis, the bassist extraordinaire known as Flea, and the Will Ferrell lookalike Chad Smith on drums. He's a darn good drummer too. The album produced many hit singles, including Give It Away, Breaking the Girl, If You Have to Ask, and Suck My Kiss, which is a terrible name for a song that has caused weirdness for other people, not just me, right? Like that time the song came on and I was in the car with my dad and he asked me what they were trying to say, and I was like, I don't know. And there were weird moments for you guys too, right? Okay, I thought so. But the most amazing song on the album, and the one you saw coming a mile away, is, without a doubt, Apache Rose Peacock. Oh, wait, sorry. I wrote down the wrong one. You knew I was joking though, huh? Everyone knows the Chili Peppers' best song. No, without a doubt, the bestest, most fun, and happy time song to listen to on this album is Under the Bridge. Because it just is. Go listen to it. It has all you'd want in a Chili Peppers song, and even though it sounds pretty 90s these days, I think it still holds up great. Alright, coming in at number 2, we have Metallica's self-titled album, also known as the Black Album. We've reached the last 2 spots on this list, and Metallica's Black Album is here now, and it's pretty angry that it had to wait so long. Calm down, Black Album. It wants to play for you, should you choose to put it on and listen to it. Songs like Enter Sandman, Sad But True, The Unforgiven, Wherever I May Roam, and Nothing Else Matters. Really though, all of the songs on the album shine through as great metal/hard rock songs, similar to the way Ozzy Osbourne was a bit more hard rock than metal in the 90s. Longtime fans of the band though, where are you guys all going? I see you leaving. What's that? You're going to listen to Master of Puppets or Ride the Lightning instead? Well, I don't blame you. I mean, I probably even prefer the almost no bass at all album And Justice for All to the Black Album myself, but the Black Album was such a huge success that it has to be given some credit. It's one of the best-selling albums worldwide, even being certified 16 times platinum by the RIAA in 2012, despite the fact that Napster existed and made Lars pretty sad. Well done, dudes. Sadly, the band pretty much dwindled after this album, taking on too many new musical styles that were an even bigger departure from this first big departure. But it's not like they went broke or anything. They're still around. They even released a new song just recently, and I happen to think it's not too bad. To me, it kind of sounds like it should be the theme song to one of those TV shows on the History Channel where they fix up classic cars and motorcycles and stuff, but I'll take it. Side note, does anyone remember that parody band called Beatallica? You know, they mix Beatles and Metallica songs together like Got to Get You Trapped Under Ice. They're pretty great, you should check them out too. Alright, lastly, number 1, we have Nirvana's Nevermind. We're here, guys, at number 1 now, and this time, if you didn't think it was going to be Nevermind by Nirvana, then I'm here to tell you it's Nevermind by Nirvana, and it's number 1. You've got your Kurt, you've got your Dave, you've got your Chris. They were the biggest and best power trio of the 90s. Well, not counting Green Day too, but Green Day was only just getting started when Nevermind broke through. Back in 1991, free samples of Tide and flannel sweaters started being delivered to everyone's mailboxes, ushering in the wondrous era of grunge that would take the world by storm for like 3 years or so. It was the predecessor to what is possibly the worst music ever created though, post-grunge. So maybe grunge isn't as cool as we thought. Oh wait, actually sorry, I just checked again. Yeah, sorry. It appears that nu metal has been voted as the worst music to be considered a subgenre of rock. Okay, Tom Morello takes all the credit for nu metal anyway, so we're safe, Nirvana fans. But perhaps you've heard or seen some of the work from this little group known as Nirvana. The story goes that they were from Seattle, they were really famous, they didn't like it, but secretly they probably did like it. And they were the epitome of cool though. Sorry Oasis, but Nirvana was more like the Beatles of the time. But in a fashion that was more in line with the attitude of the 90s. They drew stuff on their shirts by hand with Sharpies, and they dyed their hair weird colors and wore ragged jeans and just did the exact opposite of what bands like Motley Crue or Poison or Winger and all the other mainstream hard rock bands were doing just a few years before. And kids like me, we saw right through the cheesiness of the hair metal back then, and we loved Nirvana for daring to be so different. As much as I have to admit that Nirvana was more of just a turning point for me and a band that I listen to on occasion now, much more than daily like I used to back in 1992, say, I have to admit that without them, I might not have ever gotten into music as much as I did. So I guess I can blame Kurt for something. But hey, I'm not mad about it. Well, alright guys, that's my list. I hope you enjoyed it. It's all meant to be in good fun and to reflect on what an incredible year 1991 truly was for rock and roll. Yes, many of these bands were around before and after 1991, and some are still making music today, for better or worse. But if you were around to experience all these great albums as they dropped and rose to the top of the charts in the early 90s, then I guess you got to experience something really special too. Will we ever experience anything quite like this again? I can only hope. I'll have to try and make a video like this for 2021 at some point, and I'm not even sure who I'm going to even put down. Most of the groups will have to be much smaller bands in comparison because rock music just isn't at the forefront like it once was. The biggest bands we have these days have mostly been around for a long time, but that's a whole other story and a whole other rant. For now, let's just appreciate what we have and go listen to all these albums again. Cheers.